I never fancied myself a vengeful man. I'd always believed in fairness, understanding, and the power of forgiveness. But that belief, much like the marriage I thought I had, came crashing down on a Saturday night at a swanky party hosted by one of my wife's colleagues. The evening had started innocently enough. Lydia and I had been married for 8 years, and while things hadn't been perfect lately, I still believed we were a team. We arrived at the party arm in arm, her silver cocktail dress shimmering under the golden light of the crystal chandelier. She laughed, flipping her auburn hair over her shoulder, drawing admiring glances from everyone we passed. She was radiant as always, and I felt a familiar twinge of pride that she was mine. At first, the party was a blur of small talk and clinking champagne glasses. Lydia introduced me to a few of her coworkers, one of whom was him, Mark. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the smug grin of a man who thinks the world owes him admiration. Lydia had mentioned him in passing. A new addition to her team, smart, ambitious, and annoyingly charismatic. He seemed polite enough at first, though I noticed his eyes lingering on Lydia's neckline a bit too long. I brushed it off. Surely I was imagining things. But as the night wore on, the unease in my gut grew. Lydia and Mark kept finding themselves in conversation, their laughter floating above the din of the party like an intimate melody. I sipped my drink, forcing smiles through conversations I wasn't paying attention to while my eyes kept darting back to her. She seemed flattered by his attention, her cheeks flushed. Not the kind of flush that came from champagne. I told myself to relax. Jealousy wasn't a good look. Lydia loved me. We had a life together, a history. No man, no matter how confident or charming, could break what we had. That illusion shattered when I saw it. I was heading back from the bar, a fresh drink in hand, when I noticed them standing near the balcony. Lydia was turned slightly away from me, her laughter ringing out. Mark's hand was resting on the small of her back, far lower than it had any right to be. And then, as if in slow motion, I saw his hand slip under the hem of her skirt. My blood turned to ice. She didn't slap him. She didn't push him away. She didn't do anything. Instead, she tilted her head, biting her lip in a way I knew too well. My drink nearly slipped from my hand. For a moment, I froze, my mind reeling. Was this real? Did I misunderstand? But no. There was no mistaking the look in her eyes or the smirk on his face. Fury burned through me like wildfire, and my hands trembled as I fought the urge to march over and break every bone in his smug, arrogant face. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and walked away, leaving the party without a word, plotting the reckoning. The next few days were a blur of feigned normalcy. I needed to keep my emotions in check, needed time to think. Lydia acted as though nothing had happened, her behavior toward me unchanged, which only deepened the knife in my chest. I couldn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation would only lead to lies, deflection, and excuses. I needed proof. I needed leverage. Most importantly, I needed a plan. I began digging. Lydia wasn't as careful as she thought she was. A glance at her phone while she showered revealed a string of flirtatious texts with Mark. It wasn't just one night. It had been going on for months. The betrayal hit me like a freight train, but I swallowed the pain, letting it fuel my resolve. Mark, it turned out, wasn't just a sleazy coworker. He was also married. His wife, Rebecca, was a reserved but kind woman I had met briefly at a company event. She didn't deserve this any more than I did. I reached out to her anonymously, sharing just enough to pique her suspicion. The enemy of my enemy was about to become my greatest ally. The setup, with Rebecca's help, the plan came together like clockwork. We arranged a dinner party, inviting both Lydia and Mark under the pretense of a couple's evening to celebrate some vague accomplishment of hers at work. Lydia, none the wiser, was thrilled at the idea, especially since Mark and his wife would be there. She even asked me to pick out a wine. The irony nearly made me laugh. The night arrived and I played the perfect host. Rebecca and I exchanged knowing glances, our mutual disgust at the situation binding us in a temporary alliance. Lydia and Mark, oblivious to the storm brewing around them, were all smiles and stolen glances, their arrogance only stoking my determination. Halfway through dinner, I excused myself to grab a special dessert from the kitchen. That was the cue. Rebecca followed me a few moments later while Lydia and Mark remained at the table, likely basking in their delusions of secrecy. What they didn't know was that the dining room was wired, cameras, microphones. Every whisper, every lingering touch, they were all being captured in crystal clear detail. Rebecca had suggested the idea, and I'd installed everything myself, my hands steady despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. As we returned to the table, I made a show of raising my glass, proposing a toast to trust and transparency. Lydia's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered, raising her glass with the others. The reveal dessert was served, but none of us ate much. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, I set my fork down and leaned back in my chair. "There's something I'd like to share," I began, my tone calm but firm. Lydia's eyes darted to mine, a flicker of unease crossing her face. I picked up a remote from the table and pressed a button. The television mounted on the wall flickered to life, displaying a paused video. Lydia's face turned pale as she recognized the scene. The party, the balcony, her and Mark's indiscretion frozen in time. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Evidence," I said simply. I pressed play. The room fell silent as the video played, every damning detail laid bare. Rebecca's face hardened, her eyes locked on Mark, who had gone ashen, his bravado crumbling in an instant. Lydia turned to me, tears welling in her eyes, but I held up a hand, stopping her before she could speak. "I don't want to hear your excuses," I said coldly. "This isn't about salvaging anything. This is about accountability." Rebecca stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury, "you will be hearing from my lawyer. And don't even think about coming home tonight." Mark opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off with a glare that could have melted steel. He slumped in his chair, defeated. As for Lydia, she sobbed, begging for forgiveness, promising it meant nothing, that it was a mistake. But her words were hollow, her tears falling on deaf ears. "This isn't just about you and me," I said, my voice steady. "It's about respect, for our marriage, for yourself. And you threw it all away. For what? A cheap thrill." I stood, looking down at her one last time. "I'll be filing for divorce first thing tomorrow. The papers are already prepared. And don't think you're walking away with anything more than what you brought into this marriage. I've been careful, very careful." Lydia's sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. The love I once had for her had been replaced by a cold, impenetrable wall. The aftermath, the fallout, was swift and brutal. Mark's wife followed through on her promise, filing for divorce and exposing his behavior to their social and professional circles. He was forced to resign from his position, his reputation in tatters. Lydia tried to reach out in the weeks that followed, but I blocked her number, her emails, her pleas for a second chance. I wasn't interested in reconciliation. My focus was on rebuilding my life, free from the toxic weight of betrayal. I moved to a new city, started a new job, and found solace in the clarity that comes with letting go. The experience had been painful, yes, but it had also been liberating. I was no longer shackled by doubt or misplaced loyalty. Revenge may not undo the past, but it can certainly even the scales. And in this case, justice had been served.